to
All right.
do whatever. Tell
All
me
right.
when I read for 10 minutes, right?
Yeah. All right. So I believe we're on. If you're tuning in on Facebook, welcome. My name is Timothy Gager. This is Virtual Fridays Dire Literary Series. And my feature tonight is Stephen Cramer. And Stephen will read for about 10 minutes. And then we'll have a Q&A. So if you'd like to be involved in the Q&A and the open mic, stop watching on Facebook and use the link and join us in here. I'm really looking forward to hearing Stephen's reading. And let me go and tell you all about Stephen on his bio here, if I can get there. Ta-da! So here is Stephen's bio. And Stephen's last book, Listen, was published in 2020 by MadHat Press. His previous books of poetry are The Eye That Desires to Look Upward, The World Book, Dialogue for the Left and Right Hand, Goodbye to the Orchid, The Orchard.
Orchard, yeah.
Got it. Winner of the 2005 Sheila Motton Prize from New England Poetry Club and named a 2005 Honor Book in Poetry by the Mass Center for the book. Clangings. His poems and reviews have appeared in the Atlantic Monthly, Field, the Kenyon Review, The Nation, The New Republic, and the Paris Review, Ploughshares, Poetry, and other fabulous journals. That's a nice list there, Stephen. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it right over to Mr. Stephen Cramer.
Thank you, Timothy. And again, apologies. I just turned on my timer, so when a radar sound goes off, I'm supposed to stop. Okay, I'm gonna really just pick poems at random. This is a poem I wrote pretty much during the first week of the visitation of COVID. I've written a number of poems about, or provoked by the COVID epidemic. This was the first one. It references a Swedish poet named Thomas Tranströmer, who won the Nobel Prize. We lost him maybe about 5-6 years ago. He was one of the great, I don't know how to explain it, one of the great surrealist poets with an empirical eye. That's I. So this is a poem really kind of dedicated to him. Also, I wanted to try out some things that he does so beautifully, which is his stanzas leap from subject to subject, almost like they're rocks in a stream. I live on Bedford Street in Lexington. It's so loud. We never don't have white noise. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No, reading Tranströmer during a pandemic. I've seen next to no one. My street, which I've named the busiest in the known cosmos, I could lay my body down on. Nobody's sick, goes the news from Antarctica, where snow petrels to repeal predators spew stomach oils from their beaks. I've made it past 60, brain more intact than my fingernails. My kids sing mostly on key, like great poems with flaws. Each circle deeper into hell, Dante and Virgil turn left. For God, turn up. In what ways does purgatory turn? Next to no one's seen me. Light in my bedroom window glared down at me last night from the house I grew up in. I'm going to read. That's not in Listen, but I'd like to read some poems from the book, and I'm just going to read around. I'll read this one. I'm fond of this one. It's called Note to My First Wife. I did have a first wife. Recto and verso is the publisher's name for the right and left left side of a leaf in a book. There used to be a brand of generic canned food called No Name Food. And I remember being very excited about that when I moved to Boston with my first wife from Iowa. Note to my first wife. We leased a 2-story coloring book. The peonies our neighbor planted between our recto and her verso turned out plastic to the touch. She even kept them watered. Pretty funny. Like the niblets we bought in white cans named No Name. But it's the moon who found us really hilarious that night, naked, well-oiled from head to foot. We swam across Lake McBride. No memories of you in snow. I assume you sleep as I do, more or less. When I can't you? Ginkgo trees canopied our one-way street, no address to GPS. Stopped for geese at Fresh Pond, or the news on mute. I hear you, also turned down low, saying, don't bother wondering if I'm dead. I do. Everybody knows Costco, right? I used to go all the time. Now I'm too old to push that thing or those carts around. This is a poem to prove that I can write a poem about anything, no matter how trivial. There's a reference to a movie called The Incredible Shrinking Man, but I call it, refer to it as The Incredible Shrinking Everyman. It was one of those 50s B science fiction films that's, pretty standard stuff. He shrinks and has to climb up pieces of thread and stuff and fights spiders and things like that. But the ending is extraordinary because he keeps shrinking until he merges with the universe. And the last image of the film is with his voiceover as the credits come and you're just looking out into space. So B movie turns really kind of deeply profound. Putti are those little floating babies in Mannerist paintings. Costco. Jars of Heinz, the size of Grecian urns. Enough Reynolds wrap to foil an asteroid. Eros, in particular. Who's not aroused by sales? My cart's heavy as the Fiat. I watched 4 Romans lift into a spot downwind from the Colosseum's air of cat piss. Sun through skylights makes laptops, flat screens, and vats of Tide shine. Pooty-like, kind of. Sparrows loft down from the vaults. But when a day's gone oyster gray, its weight a 10-pound tub of putty. All the wholesale sponges in the world can't suck up this sense that I'm a poor, generic thing. Reduced to creature double features, incredible shrinking man, Everyman. His 6-pack pre-steroid, a 3-cent stamp for his loincloth. He dueled house cats with a safety pin, giving heart to boys small for their age, until he kept on shrinking to a voiceover of cosmic dust. Hack actor risen to the stars. I guess it's kind of late to ask if everybody can hear me, but I'm going to assume you can. I have a minute and 50 seconds left, so I better read something shortish. I'm going to read this poem. I've never read this poem out loud before. It's a very eccentric, I think, eccentric poem. It's almost a verbatim description of an exchange between Elizabeth I and the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux. He apparently, when she was at a point where she was using very thick makeup to hide how old she was, he said something rather mean-spirited to a fellow courtier. It's said that that's what led to his beheading. But I think that's not true. I think, in fact, and the poem says it's not true. I think he was beheaded for plain old treason, not snarkiness. Okay, the poem is called Envy. Envy, with a little epigraph. Elizabeth I and Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex. And it's one sentence, unpunctuated. I've never read it out loud to anyone other than myself and my pet. Envy. Because he beheld her face, without the paste of white lead and vinegar, her ladies administered as makeup, a concoction which in time so chewed up her poxy skin, he's rumored to have said too loud to a fellow courtier, facing her one faces the moon, she had him beheaded, or so the legend goes, though some say everyday treason did him in. And anyway, this poem is entitled Envy, not Vanity. Oh, my illustrious friends, I want to kill or become, standing there between me and the lip of the sea. So that's it. I never got a chance to I got to turn this off. I never got a chance to sort of unveil how envious I feel of my more successful friends. That's what that poem liberated me to do that.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And I do want to give a plug for this last book, Listen. This is a
Yeah.
wonderful book, and I didn't even realize that it was out. There's someone on this call that had purchased this book, and I picked it up, and I was like, "Oh, it's a new book from Stephen," and it's just wonderful. And I immediately emailed you to appear in the series here, and so I have a few questions, and there are a few questions that are appearing to me as well. So one
Okay.
thing I notice about the book Listen, there's quite a range from like personal to societal to historical. And does a collection have to have such a range in it? I mean, Costco is a very humorous poem, obviously.
My feeling, well, first of all, the genesis of that book was a little bit odd for me in that I was working on poems that are in that book as early as 2007, maybe 2006. And then a book length sequence occurred to me to write, and it took over everything for the next 2 years. And that was my previous book called Clangings, which is in the voice of someone who speaks in clang association, which is a form of speech and thought disorder associated with mania and schizophrenia. It took me over for 2 years. So I finished that and then went back and said, okay, what am I doing? Because I had written other poems. So Listen grew out of having to figure out how some poems that were as old enough that they were about my children as tweens, and some more recent poems about my children where they are adults. How do they talk to each other? And that took quite a while and a lot of help from friends. The only other thing I will say is that when I read a book of poems, I love not to know what's coming next, formally, subject matter, more formally than, I mean, there can be a whole sequence of love poems, for example. And I really enjoy seeing how the poet tests their formal ingenuity. Philip Larkin said all his books were variety shows. That you start with the yodeling dogs, and then you bring in the dancing bears, and then you have the opera singer, then you have the person reciting from Hamlet, then you have the Beatles, and you never mentioned the Beatles. I would have the Beatles in my variety show. So I love variety. I don't hate books that are obsessively singular in form and content, but I really like to see different strategies.
Well, you partially answered the next question that's in the chat, but I guess so. Even with variety and surprising the reader, do you still try to shoot for some sort of arc?
Yes, absolutely. And I really hope this book, maybe more so than my other books, uh, there's an arc to experience and take pleasure in. The book begins with a poem called Bad. And it's probably the most, somebody referred to it as in the tone of Eeyore on a good day. And I said, good day? Um, it begins a sequence of poems about an extended period of depression that I underwent. Um, and by the end of the first section, I hope the eye is looking up, both eyes. Vision and self. The second section pretty much focused on poems about relationships and the outcomes of relationships, which are often children. The book does confront the social world. And then the last section is a section more or less of homages, artists and writers who have meant a great deal to me, not exclusively, but to a large extent. So by the end, there's a poem based on a German poet, Ingeborg Bachmann, called Bohemia Lies by the Sea, and it's an adaptation. And I hope its guarded optimism is where the reader gets to. So I was very conscious of wanting not so much an arc as I don't know, a mission unaccomplished. It's the best way I can think of to say it.
Well, you alluded to this when you were talking about the book Clangings, but mental health is a very big theme in Listen. And I really enjoy the poem South Belknap, which
Mhm.
is like a conversation in a group therapy type of
Yeah.
session. Is it important to talk about it or write about mental health issues?
Well, I mean, for me, I couldn't help but write about it. My poems, with the exception of Clangings, which even though it's about mental health, it's entirely an invented persona. It's the only time I've had the experience that I'm sure DeWitt has had, which is a character starts doing things you didn't expect the character to do. Um, for me, that takes place in the poem. The language starts doing things you didn't expect to do. And often it leads to aspects of yourself that you didn't know you had. Um, but I would like to believe that anybody who reads Listen, if they have dealt with depression, would feel less alone as a result of reading at least the first section, if not more. I certainly didn't write them in order to um, reach out to other people who have gone through depression the way I did. I wrote them. Um, so Gregory Orr has this great book called Poetry of Survival. And he says trauma, mental illness, trauma is always chaos. And art is always an attempt to make some sort of order out of chaos, even if it's a misshapen order. And I would say that was the impulse behind the writing of even the most, even that poem, South Belknap, Belknap, which I did, I was there, I did attend therapy sessions, but everything else about the poem is invented.
Now, if you were writing poems as you're experiencing such things, do you need to step back and have some temporal or some emotional distance from?
When I was during this period where I uh, underwent, I come by it, the condition of depression honestly. My father was bipolar. I didn't get the mania. I only got the downside. Um, During those 3 years, I was functional. I worked. I taught. Um, I wrote very little. In fact, everything I wrote during that year, almost everything, I threw out. The poems that make up the section of Listen that charts that period were either written beforehand, like Bad was written way before that period, and I had no idea what bad meant. Now that it's placed at the beginning of the section, the reader can't help but draw conclusions about what bad means. But I was not able to write very much when I was undergoing that period. It was retrospectively. Emotion, depression recollected in tranquility.
Now, one thing I notice in your poetry is you describe things in a very exquisite way. Is it a challenge to say things in a different way for you, or does it come naturally?
Does not come natural. Writing is, I hate writing, really hate it. I like rewriting. Um, and my first drafts are very fragmented, often incoherent, which disturbs me. And it's only when I start taking a bunch of different fragments of things, and I didn't always write this way, uh, and start putting them together into one document and seeing how they talk to each other, that a poem begins to assemble itself. Um, but people talk about like those first draft zones. Uh-uh, not me. I get into the zone when something has already started to surface from the developing fluid, and I can work on. That's a mixed metaphor because you can't do that really with a photograph, or an inapt metaphor. But I struggle. I write badly before I write well. The shitty first drafts of Annie Lamott. That's her essay. I identify deeply with that.
So this goes well past your inner editor.
Say that again.
This goes well past your inner editor because as writers we have these inner editors that basically just tell you that you suck. So it sounds
Oh,
like this goes way past that.
yes. It is very hard to get. Well, I look at it this way. I think any honest artist has a voice that says you'll never know if you're any good, right? That one I can handle. That's the agnostic one. It's the flat earth society one that I hate, the one that says, I know you're no good, the imposter syndrome. And I'm not sure everybody has that one. A lot of people do. You hook artists up to lie detector tests. Most of them will have to tell the truth that yes, that voice that says, who do you think you are even trying, comes out. The other one, you'll never know. I'm fine with that. I don't want to know in some ways, because the answer might not be the answer you want. Better not to know whether you'll be any good. You're any good. But the one that says you're no good, oh, I would love to throttle that one.
So you founded the Lesley MFA program and then you championed it. How do you do something like that? Does it just strike you one day like this is needed, or was it brought to you? Like, tell me about that process.
It was brought to me. I had been teaching I was a teaching nomad for years. I taught at BU, Bennington, MIT, Tufts. I had a gig at Queen's University in Charlotte in a low residency program. I, my wife and I and two kids, one kid and then two, spent 5 years in Bennington, Vermont. I was teaching at Bennington. That ended, and I was back here teaching at BU and MIT, and I got a call from Lesley saying, two people have said that you might be the right person to start a low residency program for us. We already have it accredited. Are you interested? And so I took the job, and I lied through my teeth. I said I had administrative experience, and I didn't. And that took over my life for the next 12 years. I mean, I didn't stop writing, but I will say that founding and then nurturing and navigating that program for 12 years took away a lot of time from writing. I would have, I think, written a lot more if I hadn't done it, but it created a community that's still there. And there are people who have made lifelong artistic, literary friendships as a result of it. And I feel like, you know, not just me, it was real barn building experience. I mean, there are people I'd like to mention: Michael Lowenthal, David Elliott, the wonderful children's writer, Rachel Kadish, wonderful fiction writer. We all worked on it together. And it's a new literary community in the Boston, Cambridge area that didn't exist before.
Now, tell me a little bit about the young Stephen Cramer. Did he
Yeah.
wish to be a writer or a poet, or?
Um, I was not a big reader. I did not come from a reading household. My mother read, and I found out after her death that she kept little poems, little riddles that she wrote and kept in a drawer. But I did not grow up in that sort of household that a number that I sometimes envy, which is where you grow up in a trilingual household, so you don't have to struggle with other languages or there are books all over the place. Not the case for me. I played drums in a rock band. Always wanted to figure out what John Lennon was saying in his songs, particularly when he was writing good songs. So I was always interested in the mysteries of uh, language in and as music. I still think the lyrics to Strawberry Fields are minimalist poetry of a very high order. Uh, but I did read, I read Dracula when I was in fifth grade. I was really into monsters, and so I read Dracula and then stubbed my mind on Frankenstein. I couldn't do it. Dracula was much more reader friendly to a 10-year-old, I guess. But then I met two families, uh, a family of communists uh, who were blacklisted. This was in Republican Brookside, New Jersey. And then my girlfriend, father was an artist who'd given up painting for textbook, working in a textbook, art department of a textbook publisher. And when I'd go over to house, I'd look at the shelves and I go, oh, Rilke, who's Rilke? What's this book called America with a K? And that changed my life at around the age 17. Then by 18, I was in a high school English class, and the teacher, and it was my girlfriend, who said, you have to take the class with this guy. You can't keep taking this B or A. You got to take honors English. And he read The Wasteland, Eliot, Frost, Whitman out loud, and the sound of poetry out loud converted me from behind the drum set. It took another year and a half to realize I wasn't going to be the next Ringo, but once it did, I went to Antioch College hungry for poetry.
When did you realize from the appreciation of that sort of literature that, hey, I am doing this?
It was at Antioch. I was reading a lot. I discovered Yeats. I remember reading before I started Antioch, reading like, you know, almost all of Ibsen's plays because the book was like, my roommate had it on a shelf or something. When I got to Antioch, I thought I was going to be a high school English teacher because I so loved my high school English teacher. But then I met a number of people, Stuart Deschelle, Oscar Melnichuk, a wonderful writer named David Gittleman, who is now publishing stories after a long hiatus. Stuart's published books. Oscar founded Anyi. In fact, it existed in his dorm room in 1973 in Antioch. But I was terrified to write. I just wanted to read, and I was terrified to put a word of my own, other than about what I'd read. And then Stuart Deschelle said, Stephen, you're a pretty smart guy. You could probably do it. And that flipped the switch for some reason. And then I wrote miserable Eliot imitations for at least a year or 2 years. But I learned that you learn how to write by reading and imitating. And then there was a workshop that I won't go into. I've actually written about it. It's online. Ira Sadoff taught a workshop in 1974 at Antioch that included Stuart, me, David, Sarah Gorham, Jim Galvin, Laurie Scheck, Jean Day, a wonderful language poet who lives in Berkeley. And it was absolutely life-changing for everybody in the class.
All right, let's finish up this Q&A.
Yeah, am I taking up
No, no,
everybody else's
I'm
time?
no, I can talk. You're not. In fact, I have to say that and do that. Otherwise, I'll be involved with my feature for like an hour and a half. So, Clangings was fascinating because in poetry, I always feel that people you go from the concrete to the more random. In Clangings, you're going for. I'm sorry, in poetry, you go from the more random to the concrete on
Mm.
the page. And in Clangings, you're going from concrete to random based on the voicings. And then there's also dialogue for the left and right hand. And then there is the I that. So these are all like senses. Is
Mhm.
that something you find is a real strength in your work?
I'd like to think that I would like to think that my poems at their best vividly appeal to the reader's senses, because I think that that's one of the reasons why we read anything, which is language's capacity to be evocative in a sensory way. Interestingly enough, I'm teaching a seminar at Lesley this June that's brand new and it may flub or bomb, called Tell, Don't Show, Poems with No or Almost No Imagery. Because I wanted the students to explore the ways in which other events of language using spacing, rhythm, punctuation can create a texture that's as vivid as metaphor, but is not fundamentally concrete and imagistic. I'll say one more thing. Clangings is dissociative rather than associative. But my hope is that it creates a character who wants to make sense but can't. And the more you read the poems, the more you get the emotional charge of that wanting to make sense and not being able to, which is why the epigraph is Eliot's. It is impossible to say just what I mean.
Well, Stephen, I want to thank you. This was wonderful and
And
very
again, I feel stupid that I.
well. No, don't feel that way at all. It was wonderful and very informative and very entertaining. And here's Stephen's last book. Listen, and you can find out about it at MadHat Press, as you can see right up here. But if some of his other books that we've discussed today, if that seem to be of interest of you, look them up, purchase them, support the smaller pressers, and support the indie bookstores. Stephen, do you have a favorite indie bookstore?
Yeah. Well, Porter Square Books for a face-to-face bookstore, and I think bookshop.org is an online bookstore that's kind of it is the um, ethical alternative to Amazon. Uh, I don't think you can get as many discounts as you can with Amazon, but bookshop.org, they are really, and every purchase, some portion of it goes to supporting independent bookstores.
And they need your support during the pandemic. But now
Yes.
that society is lifting, that go visit your local bookstore, and all the money you've saved by not commuting, put it to good use.
All that gas money.
Exactly. All right, so we're going to end the live stream on Facebook. If you're tuning in on Facebook, thank you very much. And we will not see you next week on Easter weekend, but we will have the 1 year anniversary reading, and it'll be straight open mic on the 1st April weekend. So thank you, Stephen, very, very much.
You're
And
welcome. I'm looking forward to the readings.
all right.